Welcome back to Animal Songs, a story set to music, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb. Dominating others may be an essential component of our nature, although I doubt it is the specific hallmark of the human being. Yes, we need leaders to coordinate group efforts. That takes strength, and it takes courage to follow. But the truth is that the human being is the one who exits the status quo. Many monkeys remained in the treetops. I've heard it said that humanity is the ability to throw off programs. I also heard that the soul is a hydra of animal heads. Our job is to find the face that is most human. Then I guess we're not quite there yet. Changes, sculpted by nature. Evolution. Seal. His Highness, the 442nd Sovereign of Pirot Bay, the Koran Mountains, and all the wild plains of the nation of Pirot, His Majesty King Leonel Vivaldi sat enthroned in the glass stone chamber. The room had been carved from an ancient material that had once been the source of his family's wealth, but was now all mined out from the depths of the Koran Range, a substance with the translucence of glass but the firmness of lead, a type of quartz so luminous that the king's chamber appeared to be a carving of pure ice. The walls were etched with scenes of the family legends, characters like Crispin with his enormous fist, and other faces and forms which would have been familiar to a scholar like Pinocchio Sinwarshar or Brother Daly, those who read their stories. And these figures eerily peered from the walls, as if they were golems morphing from a glacier. Everywhere the glass stone shined with iridal specters reflected from the enormous chandelier hanging above the king in his throne. The candles adorning this artifact burned blue, a courtly contrivance enforced by ritual, and the delicate crystals forming the body of the chandelier were each carved in the pattern of a snowflake. All together, these pieces formed one enormous hexagonal body that glowed blue from within, and beneath that spectacular treasure there sat the king. In a pose of princely boredom he reigned, right elbow propped on the plush purple arm of the throne, his head set atop his palm. His left hand rolled its fingers along the golden lion head at the end of the throne's arm. He was a boy, barely a young man, his face handsome but for the scowl that contorted his features, his body strong but surrounded in plush fabric. Cuffed and collared in white fur, his robe was the same shade as the throne, so that at first glance he might appear to be a head and hands protruding from one enormous purple form. Currently he was sneering at a body, a creature, a thing, in the center of the courtroom. It still hasn't done anything. Along the walls were stationed silver-clad guards bearing spears, with their armor reflecting the cobalt fire of the palace heart, the massive snowflake chandelier. These soldiers looked like ice carvings themselves, further projections relieved from the glass stone walls. Among the guards along the right-hand wall, there stood a man out of place in his dull gray robes. He was almost hiding between the guards, and he was succeeding in his silly camouflage by virtue of a lack of character that rendered him see-through. He was nobody in the worst sense, the court attendant, the king's advisor, a true courtier, invisible in the trappings of the palace, as clear as the courtroom walls. Now the bored king turned his eyes from the mysterious object of his disdain, searching the room for somebody to explain it. The invisible man had to give up himself. "My lord," said the courtier in a voice as gray as himself, "the lady did promise to return with its food. Perhaps it requires this special something to, get going." The king sneered at the gray man until the courtier bowed and began to scurry backwards towards the wall. "Kick it." The advisor froze. "My lord." "Do it. Now." Meekly the gray man raised his head, his face twisted into a pleading expression, the face of a beggar starving on the street. He was still bent into a bow as he turned his head to consider his fate. The object in the center of the room was a different kind of gray. This thing appeared to be iron, a hardy metallic color you could almost taste. It shimmered or vibrated. It was large, several people could have sat atop it, and it was shaped something like a donut or a blood cell, a meaty ring that bent into itself. It was a shape that whispered the word infinity. Again it shimmered, it rolled, like a snake stretching its unspeakable musculature. The courtier turned his face to the king. He was still bent at the waist. "My lord," he said in a more substantial tone, "is that most wise?" "Better than if I did it," said the king. He scowled at the man. "Laugh," he proclaimed. The courtier struggled to make some kind of noise, and he shut his eyes and bowed farther. "My lord." Now the plea was evident in his voice. From the shadows of the throne there stepped a needle-nosed man in black armor. He reached a gauntleted hand around the hilt of his sword. The slit of the steel sliding in the scabbard resonated in the glass stone chamber. Now it was the king's turn to laugh. "Do it," said the king. He lifted his left hand from the lion head, his wrist held limply so that his fingers fell like fangs over the distant courtier's skull. With the man held in his grasp, the king directed him towards the silver entity. A clatter of footsteps rang from the distant hallway. Indistinguishable from the man in the king's clutches, another gray courtier entered the throne room. "My lord," called the new man, and he bowed graciously. His left arm over his belly, his right arm extended, displaying his lack of weaponry. He raised his head and said, "There are..." The king pointed at the man and he froze. "Just a moment." He leveled his finger at the first subject. "You." He directed his pointer to the entity, and with his teeth gritted, he repeated, "Kick it." The courtroom was so silent that you could hear the beads of cold sweat sliding down the soldiers' cheeks as they struggled to restrain their trembles. The invisible courtier practically sobbed, "My lord." He slunk to the object, the gray steps of his slippers coughing in his wake. The king laughed. It towered over him, merciless in its mystery. The silver form wriggled, flashing secret rainbows. The beauty of the sight only made the thing more terrible. The courtier was an insect in the shadow of this body. The gray man shut his eyes as he extended his foot. The king was on the edge of his seat. "Kick it good now. I want to hear it groan. Kick it good or I'll have your head." The meaty thunk reverberated like a bass drum in the courtroom. The gray man fell to his knees. The king's black eyes widened. It trembled. The whole form seemed to rotate into itself. Then nothing more. His Highness fell back in his seat, his head now propped on his right fist. His left hand resumed its slow drum roll. "Well, what?" He let the left hand raise towards the new courtier at the door, and the man trotted around the entity, giving it a wide berth. Again he bowed. "My lord, there are citizens at the gate. They say they have important news." "I'm sure. And a request of your grace." "Naturally. Well, what is it?" "They insist on stating their case themselves." The king sighed. He returned his attention to the silver mystery still sleeping in the center of his courtroom. The wandering left hand found its way to his chin and started to stroke the smooth point. The king's eyes reflected the entity. Very well. He hardly noticed the courtier's exit. He was consumed by the serpentine form. The invisible man, who had fallen to his knees beside the object, was now hobbling back to hide along the wall. "You know," said the king, and the man halted. Slowly he turned to bow. "My lord?" "You know, power." His left hand continued stroking his smooth chin. "Control. It is a bit like death." "Yes, absolutely, my lord." "Death controls life." "Absolutely, my lord." "I control life." "No question, my lord." "That is power." The left hand held the entity in its palm. "That is death." "So one would think, my lord." "Quit your groveling and answer me this." "Absolutely, my lord." "Who controls death?" "You do, my lord." The king did not turn his attention from the entity. Its fairest form curled within each of his dark pupils. "We will see," he said. "Yes, my lord." The courtier scurried to disappear into the wall, and he looked very much like an ice carving when he placed his back between the etchings of long-forgotten faces. They stayed that way, the king in contemplation of his strange gift, and the men frozen along the walls, each of him alone in his own thoughts, until the footsteps called from the castle halls. In they trampled, world-worn souls brushing and beating these ancient tiles. The crew of the SS Enterprise entered the glass stone chamber, led by Pinocchio Sin Warshaw wielding his sacred redwood cane. He was followed by Geppetto Sin Warshaw, the earnest pig farmer who, though he had done everything unwittingly, had in a very real way made all of this possible. Ruby, the dark-gazing artist, mystical in her unreachable loneliness, the ever-faithful Humps, the reliable Mr. Frederick at Ruby's left, the king's right, the endlessly resourceful Mrs. Frida at her right, our viewer's left, and finally Keratin scraping the quartz, hooves finally meeting their match, his face concealed by the brim of his well-earned hat, though he clearly snarled at the guards in attendance of the party, Violet, the brooding chimera, the crew of the SS Enterprise huddled behind their captain, who bowed, and they followed his direction. In Pierrot, he said, "My lord," and tilting his head up from his deep gesture of supplication, Warshaw considered the strange object dominating the courtroom. "What a big, something you have." "News," said the king. His left hand rolled in the air, and his eyes never left the iron object. The courtier, the other gray man who had fetched our guests, stood to Pinocchio's right, and he urged him with a stare and gritted teeth. "Yes," said Warshaw, straightening himself. "You see, we have come." "Do not address His Majesty upright," said the courtier. "In fact, take a knee." "Yes, naturally." Warshaw fell to his knee and posed like that, with his redwood cane at his hip. He looked something like a hero. The rest of the crew followed his lead, for only Mr. Hump and Geppetto could follow the words, each of them with their own particular struggles with fabric and creaking joints. Now that the party bent in knightly reverence, for them the throne was concealed behind the solid mystery. It would appear, as it did to the soldiers surrounding them and the gray man bowing beside them, that the party was in the service of that dominating presence that shimmered in its autonomous dream. "Your Highness, my lord," said Warshaw, "we have traveled across the world to warn you. Powerful forces are at play, and they could spell your nation's doom." "Doom," said the king. "Power." His left hand stroked his smooth chin as he considered his gift. "Yes, well? We had hoped to converse with the monk in Crispin's shrine, perhaps to offer you some proof or means of protection. However, other matters have caused us to change our course. You see, this lady has lost her child. Tell me about the power and the doom, man." "Yes, you may not believe it, but perhaps news has reached Pierrot of a disastrous flood in the Western world. We were there. We witnessed the cause." The king sighed. "And? It was a dragon." "A dragon?" "I know, it sounds ridiculous. I would certainly never have believed it had I not seen it with my own eyes, but—" "Stop talking," said the king. "A dragon." A smile split his face. For the first time in some time, the king stood. At once the guards surrounding the guests, every soldier along the walls, and the gray men they revealed hiding among them, everyone fell to their knees before their lord. Now standing, the king could see over the sleeping object, so he could properly consider the bowing crew of the Enterprise. He started laughing. A dragon. Now his laughter grew more boisterous. "They came to warn me about a dragon." The gray men followed their king's cue, as did the soldiers. The courtroom filled with disdainful bellows, ape-like in their lack of compassion. Eventually, the outburst diminished to a trickle of giggles. Pinocchio said, "I know, it sounds ridiculous, Your Highness, but it is the truth. Dragons are real." "I know," said the king. "I know dragons are real. Your Majesty." Warshaw tilted his face up, and he saw the king's crowned head atop the silver form. "Of course I know about dragons, you simpleton. You're bowing before one." The silver mass shimmered. Its body was slatted with scales that each reflected a sheen of oily color. It was beautiful except for the menace of its iron bulk, a body that spoke of swords and chains and teeth. "How?" Pinocchio stared at his own reflection in the body of the sleeping dragon. "How?" said the king. "An old woman brought it to me, a gift for her sovereign. Can you imagine? True generosity, not a favor in return." Sneering down from the dragon's hump, he added, "More than I can say for most." "I see," said Pinocchio to himself. The king grinned, and now he asked the good gentleman, captain of the wayward rowboat so sweetly christened, our man from the library, de facto leader by virtue of his friend's belief, the creation of their collective imagining about a boat with a name, Pinocchio Sin Warshaw. To him the king decreed, "Kick it." Meanwhile, Sebastian rounded a snowbank to approach a massive stone that Peter, watching from behind the reins, had believed to be a distant mountaintop when he'd spotted this icy crag peeking above the treetops. The glass stone palace was indeed carved from the mountain, and it wasn't until the cart emerged onto the driveway, that Peter understood what he was looking at, because he was greeted by a battalion of rime-armored soldiers. Warshaw circled the dreaming dragon, considering its endless pattern of scales. "I wonder," he muttered. "I don't see your toe pointed," said the king. "I'm waiting to hear that meaty thunk." Pinocchio was silent save for the scrabble of his redwood cane and the patter of the old leather soles of his family boots on the glass stone floor. "Well," said the king. Morsha stroked his chin and continued his survey of the sleeping entity. "Your Highness, with all due consideration, you're talking to something of a dragon expert here." The gray man gasped and the room echoed with the chiding whispers of the word impertinence. "Yes," Pinocchio said to the ghost, "I suppose I've acquired that virtue. All told, if I direct my toe at this behemoth, I will do so only when I've discovered some precedent from the proper authorities. That is, the speakers recorded in the Shrine of Crispin. Their voices now lost. I believe because of this very creature we now contemplate, though I cannot prove her part in the fire. It would be in keeping with the witch's character to have caused such a well-suited calamity to our cause, and given her now understood association with this dragon—" "Enough talk," said the king. "Kick it. Now." "My lord, there's simply no cause for such behavior," said Warshaw. Again the whispers surrounded him with their shock and admonishment. Warshaw went on. "A punch, however." "Fine, punch it." The king's arms flew above his head, and his body fell back into its plush purple container. As Warshaw balled his fist, the image of the shrine entrance, surrounded by the ruins, that ancient doorway shone before him. "Perhaps," he whispered to his reflection in the dragon scales, "we shall see." His fist closed, he cocked his arm back, shut his eyes, and winced. But he was stopped by further footfalls. A new arrival, equally accompanied by soldiers, entered the courtroom. That was all it took. The very presence of Todd in the dragon's vicinity unleashed something a little like this. "I don't mean to disappoint you," said the voice. Ruby was sobbing, clutching Todd to her chest. Peter was rambling about the deceitful bartender who had smiled to him with only 3 crumbling teeth surrounded by darkness. Violet bowed to his old companion, his hat in his hands, and he said nothing about the truth of those events. He would keep his secret. This lie would turn into a sort of virtue for Violet, who understood finally what it was to be a chimera, truth and all. Frederick clapped Peter on the back, and Frida tugged him into a tight hug, and all 3 of them instantly understood their relationship, what they had always been, regardless of whether or not there were any truth to Frida's sudden recollection, invention, decision, dream of her deep understanding, the image of a basket floating along the lost river. Even Geppetto and Pinocchio exchanged a heartfelt head nod, and Warshaw thoughtlessly let his fist fall and his fingers uncurl. His cheeks flushed. Indeed, Warshaw had been darkening in his skin's tone for some time. All of the crew were the better for their ocean-acquired burns, and the mere presence of Todd in the vicinity of the dragon was all it took. The monster was gone. In its place in the center of the court, there now stood a white crow, or perhaps it was a blushing dove. The bird that stood, twitching its head fearfully, auric eyes wide with confusion. The animal seemed to be many things at once. It was light in color, it had wings, but to each viewer it was something slightly different. "A crow?" said Warshaw. "Are you blind?" said his father. "It's certainly a duck." "A dove," said Peter, and Mrs. Hump kissed his cheek. "Absolutely, my pet. Isn't he a dear?" Mr. Hump nodded in agreement, but he cocked an eyebrow at the animal. Yes, right. "I don't think that's any bird we've seen before," said Violet. For whatever reason, he looked at Ruby. She had been consumed in her motherly embrace, but now, under the detection of another's gaze, she looked up and met Violet's eyes. The light was on again, an amber glow. She could see. "I'm sorry," said Violet, and Ruby saw everything. "You," she started, but her voice fell. She hugged Todd to her. "I have to tell you, though she hid her face from Violet, she did smile. The truth is always the true virtue. Violet is a chimera, and he was glad to be one." "No!" the king screamed. He leapt from his throne, his purple robe billowing behind him as he raced to the center of the court. The bird glanced over its shoulder at the ensuing purple shadow, and it flapped its wings. The bird shot into the air and vanished into the blue glowing chandelier. "My dragon, my power!" The king fell to his knees. "She said it would eat. She said it ate hearts. I want." He was on his feet in an instant. With his back to the crew, as he paced back to his throne, this king's left hand waved over his shoulder. "Killed him." Now from its perch between the crystal snowflakes, the bird that was a dragon watched the black-armored servant with his needle nose step from the shadows of the throne. The knight, if you could call him that. He pursed his lips and let out a low whistle. He grinned, revealing teeth the color of mushroom stalks with points as sharp as his nose. With one thickly gauntleted hand, he pulled his sword, singing from its scabbard. The hiss of the steel resonated with one bright tone. The blade was so sharp, and the whistling man harmonized with his blade. Together they made an evil interval, something harsh, a dyad that cut through realities to reach the ears of our hero. "It needs to resolve," said the bird. Once upon a time, a dragon in a white hood had sat in the darkness plucking the strings of his friend's harp. When the tritone opens up to a simple major third, the resolution is that much sweeter for the preceding tension. "Something like that," said the bird in the chandelier. "Something like this. Everything changes. Nothing in time is motionless. Even mountains flow. The ocean is a beating heart. Even if we had the power to change life, it would only change again, forever slipping through our grasp. And even if you could try to correct your lifelong mistakes, you would only repeat them in new and interesting ways. Resolve. There will be no end to this story. The bird will spread its wings, and as it flies downward to defend its suddenly recognized companions, it will open its mouth and grow. The dragon swallows the singing night. One more mistake. Yet in that wrong, there were 1,000 rights." This has been Animal Songs, written and performed by Jamie Holcomb, produced by Supermoon. Find us on TikTok, YouTube, or at our website, gosupermoon.com. That's GOSUPERMOON.com. You can also find our work alongside many other talented artists at looksees.com. That's LOOK-SEES.com. This concludes the Seal chapter. I wonder what spirit we will meet next. Until then, thank you for listening.
All I got to say is, glory be, the funk's on me. I want to tell you what it is.